Normally we talk with CEOs and school superintendents and executive directors of nonprofits, but today I've got a really special guest. My neighbor, Betty Hoernschemeyer. She's 98 and a half years old. She was a Rosie the Riveter, one of the first two women, actually I think the first two women to work in the factory here in the Detroit area during the World War, and just an unbelievable person, frankly. Not just because she's my neighbor, but because of what she represents. And if I could boil it all down to one thing, it's that she just appreciates life. She is grateful for everything, and she chooses that way of thinking. Even though at a young age she lost sisters to the flu, a sister to cancer, her brother was in Okinawa. In 1929, a tornado wiped out their entire farm, which they then lost during the Depression. Just challenge after challenge, and yet Betty sees everything as a blessing and as a gift, as she has certainly been a blessing to my family and to my kids in particular. There's so many leadership lessons in what she says and in her timeless wisdom that I just had to share it with all of you, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. And finally, I just want to thank you, Betty, for the life you live and for all the contributions you continue to make to the world. God bless you. Betty, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. It's so great to have you.
I'm happy to be here. I don't really know how I can contribute, but my name is Betty Ann Hoernschemeyer, Hockadal Hoernschemeyer. And I was born on a farm in northern Minnesota, about 40 miles east of Fargo, North Dakota. I was number 6 out of 10 children. The first 2 children died in the flu. And the next month, my mother gave birth to my oldest sister. She died of cancer in 1951. My one brother died in Okinawa. And we lived on this farm. And in 1929, there was a very bad tornado that took all the buildings, many of the buildings on the farm. And so in the process of rebuilding, my dad had to take out loans, and then the Depression hit. And so he lost the farm at that time. So I think that was like about 1932. And until 1941, we lived on the farm, occupied the house on the farm. But my parents did all kinds of other things to support the family. The family was homesteaded from my grandmother from Norway. And my father had 7 siblings, but the farm was left to 2 single brothers. And my father was born the day his father was buried. And when his mother passed away, he joined a threshing crew across the country and ended up in Washington with a brother, working on the apple farms, orchards. And when he came back to Minnesota to decide what to do with the farm, he met my mother. And she was one of 13 children, and her mother had died at a very young age, and my mother was the oldest daughter, so she practically raised her brothers and sisters, younger brothers and sisters. So she didn't want to go, he wanted to go back out to Washington. He was not a farmer, but she didn't want to leave her family. So they stayed. So over the years after we lost the farm, they ran a restaurant. He was a commercial fisherman. He commercially caught snapping turtles, dressed them, and shipped them. He ran a potato factory where they sorted the potatoes. He contracted with the farmers and sorted potatoes. They did all kinds of things to support the family. Then in 1940, my sister, who was living in Michigan, needed help because she had a 2-year-old and had to have surgery. So her husband called and wanted to know if my sister Arliss, who's a year older than I am, just graduated from high school, I wondered if she'd come out and help. So my father at that time was just a bouncer at a nightclub, and they decided he would go to Michigan where there was work.
And how old would you have been about that move?
I would have been 17.
17.
The last 2 years when we moved off of the farm into Detroit Lakes, my sister Arliss and I worked for our board and room so we could graduate from high school in Audubon. So Arliss had just graduated. Well, my father knew a truck driver who had hauled cars from Detroit to Detroit Lakes back and forth. So he contacted him, and he and my sister rode to Michigan with that truck driver. And he stayed here, and they stayed here and worked until they were able to rent a flat, 3-bedroom flat. And in September of 41, the rest of the family came. And that's how we came. We gave all of the furnishings in the house to this truck driver to take us to Michigan.
Wow. Again, all by the age of 17.
Yeah, I was 18 by that time. Yeah, because I just graduated in June at 18.
And I know, since you're my amazing neighbor, that you didn't have a indoor plumbing. You had an outhouse.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You lost several of your siblings to flu, tornado, lost the farm, depression. I mean, in just a few short minutes already, you've faced more challenges than most people, many people, I should say, face in their lifetime. And so it's such an amazing lesson in leadership, I think, that you've see your life as a blessing. And we'll continue the story in just a second. But I just want to sort of capture out of the gate here that one of the things that really is remarkable about you, Betty, is that you have chosen to see your life as a blessing, even though you've had, in already a short period of time, significant challenges. Well, how is that? How are you able to, at the age of 98, look at your life and see blessings everywhere?
I think you choose. I like to say to people, you just live one day at a time. You make choices. And I think because I had a good Christian background, it helped make better choices. And I think family is so important because they give you the support that you need. And it doesn't seem to, I don't feel that I've done anything different or anything better than anyone else. I've just lived one day at a time and took care of things as they happen.
One day at a time, a great lesson for all of us to just be present in the day that we have and focus on the good and try to deal with the bad. Right. I think today so much energy goes into, frankly, complaining about things. And
I think today we analyze everything so much. Life can be more simple if we just take it one day at a time and not worry about tomorrow so much. Although we got to be responsible for ourselves and the choices that we make. And I think that that's one of the problems with people today. Don't have the respect sometimes of the elders. They don't seem to want to take the responsibility of working for themselves. I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. But when we came on that back of that truck and rode for 2 days in a tent, and we're so happy to see my father, who I hadn't seen in a whole year,
Mm.
and move into a flat that was just a flat, 3-bedroom flat, furnished with furniture from a used secondhand store. But it was so much better than what I had that this was like heaven to us to be together again. Then I worked as a waitress. And then, of course, in December, we had the war. And my 2 brothers were 16 and 17, and they both joined the Navy. My sister and I wanted to do the same, but my dad said, no, 2 are enough. And you honored his blessings. So then I became a Rosie the Riveter and worked for 4 years at the Briggs Manufacturing Company as a Rosie the Riveter. And I think about the first 2 years I was a riveter. And after that, my sister and I moved upstairs to Douglas Aircraft, where we were inspectors instead of riveters. And it was there that I met my husband once when I was riveting, and I made a boo-boo, so to speak. And they had to call an engineer to write up a repair. And my sister and I were the first 2 women that came into this factory. And there again, I think we were these 2 innocent farm girls that these men took under their wing. They respected us for who we were. They were gentlemen at all times, teased, but never maliciously. And when this engineer came to write up the repair, we became friends. 2 years later, we were married. He took a job with Douglas Aircraft out in California. And we had gone back and forth for 2 years because he was Catholic and I was Lutheran. And at that time, the Catholic Church was all Latin and everything. And we talked to the priest, and there was no way I was going to do that. And he went and saw my pastor on his own. I didn't go with him. I heard from my pastor that he'd been there. He never told me. But he decided that we would get married in the Lutheran Church. So he went out to California, and I followed in January.
Before you go there, because love knows no bounds, obviously, with the Catholic and Lutheran intermingling in a beautiful way. This is the Culture Eats Everything podcast. So some subjects we just don't touch, like religion.
Right. Sometimes you don't talk religion and you don't talk politics.
Yes, right. Even though I love both of those worlds, we've decided to keep this focused on life lessons and leadership, and how do you stay focused and positive and responsible for your life. And the Rosie the Riveter experience that you had, for many people is completely probably a new concept. For others, we've seen the image of, the traditional Rosie with the bandana in her hair. I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And in the context of, today's working world, it's hard. It's hard to work and balance a marriage or balance a family, especially for, mothers that are out there. Maybe I would love to hear, what are your thoughts there? What advice would you have for people that are coming up in the world and having their first real job? And how did you go about your work experience?
I don't know. I think working with the men at that time was interesting. Like I said, they were gentlemen at all times. We had no problem with that. I think today, the pressure on women today, working, having a family, trying to keep a household together, along with the marriage, is a real challenge. And I think eventually women probably will not last longer than men like they do today, simply because I think the stress of what they're doing today, trying to be, I can understand the fact that you go to college, you get a degree, you want to pursue that, you want to be your own person, and yet you have to balance all these other things. So I think eventually the stress on women is going to be very hard.
Mm-hmm.
I admire my daughter has always worked and raised 2 children. My other 2 daughter-in-laws worked more or less part-time, never had a really full-time job, only for short periods of time. But I look at my daughter and see how she has handled all of this, and it makes me very proud of her. Yeah.
She's found a way to balance it all.
Right.
Yeah, it is a balance. My wife and I both work, as you know, and we've found that co-parenting, sort of being very intentional about what does the other person need, how do we help each other, and so that we can both work and be present for our kids. It is a very real challenge, and for us, we're blessed because we're blessed with the jobs that we have. For many people, they don't have as much freedom as
Right.
we do. They've got to show up at a location at a certain time to do their job, and it's just very real. It's very challenging.
I think also when you're out there working and you have to deal with other people all the time, with other personalities and so forth, and that also adds to the stress. Mm-hmm. Where the 2 of you can work here together without this outside influence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same thing with my daughter and her husband. They're fortunate that they can both work from home. Mm-hmm. Maybe socially is not always good, because I think it's harder for people to make friends and have outside interests. You become, I think it's harder especially for children. It's important that they have family, friends that they can do things with, and families interact differently, and you learn to accept that. And I remember when we first came here, they had a Lutheran school, and they approached us for sending our boys there. And we decided it was important that they learn to live with all denominations and religions, and interact with the Jewish children and so forth. So that was our choice, to be here and put them in the public school. Don't know that was good or bad. I'm sure it was better than bad.
It was perfect. It was the choice you made.
Yes.
And it helped to produce the results you have today, which is some amazing family and amazing kids and grandkids. And remind me, how many grandkids do you have?
I have 7 grandchildren. I'm expecting my 8th great grandchild. All of them have high school or college education. All my grandchildren, all my children. I have 1 single son. I have 2 great daughters-in-law that we do very well with, and 1 son-in-law that I love. That in itself is a blessing. When I think about what I have done and some of the things that we've accomplished, my husband had polio, so he never was in the service, but it was never a real handicap to him. I think the only thing he didn't do was ice skate, but he was an avid photographer, model builder. He set a wonderful example for his 3 boys. He wanted to see the United States. He was not really interested in traveling overseas. So when my youngest son was 7 years old, we got a pop-up tent. And we traveled every state in the United States with our little camper. When my daughter was born, we sold that, and my boys were teenagers by that time. And then when she was 7 years old, we bought a different camper. And then we traveled and took her to many of the places we had already taken the boys. So we've traveled to every state, including Alaska and Hawaii.
Wow. Did you drive to Alaska in the camper?
No, we flew.
Okay.
we had been in a conference in California, and that was in 1980. We were out in a conference, and we had an opportunity to take a trip to Hawaii. So we did. And let's see. And we were very active. My husband was very active in this community. He was president of the PTA. He was the ombudsman when they did the sidewalk walk program. And he worked with the YMCA and the Boy Scouts. I have one scout that's an Eagle Scout. All these things were important to us. We did some other traveling. For our 40th anniversary, we went to, that's when we went to Hawaii, yeah. And in 94, we went to England and spent time in England. In 96, we went to Norway for our 50th wedding. We also went to Maine with our entire family, grandchildren, and everybody. We spent a week in Maine at a nephew's home. And then in 96, we did a cruise to Alaska. In 1988, my husband's 50th anniversary from graduating from Lawrence Tech. We and three of his buddies that he went to school with at Lawrence Tech, we took a cruise from New York up to St. Lawrence to Montreal. So we did that.
You've seen the world, and from everything from cruise ships to small camper vans.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots of amazing lessons from all those
lots
journeys.
of little things that happen along the way. One of the things I'm always very proud of, that my daughter sang the national anthem at the Tiger Stadium in 1983.
Oh, wow.
She's done a lot of singing.
The year before they won the World Series. So
right.
Those were some good times for the Tigers.
Yeah.
That's great.
And in 97, we took a Amtrak train ride across the country to Washington, down California, all the way down to Arizona, and then we flew back again, home again. So I think we set a good example. Our kids have done a lot of traveling, and I think sometimes you don't realize how you touch people, that just having a positive attitude most of the time is setting an example for other people when you don't really realize you're doing it.
That's so tough nowadays, with we seem to be hopefully starting to come out of this pandemic for the last 18 months. And I know you live across the street from us and in the house you've been in for 60, 70 years?
Yeah.
And you live alone, obviously. How do you not get lonely? So many people are struggling with mental health these days, all the way up to many of the CEOs that we work with. And most people are, just struggling. There's like this malaise almost across society. What advice do you have for people that are struggling with just kind of day-to-day living and being lonely?
I know different friends that have more problem with than I do. I don't really reach out much for phone calls. I know people are there. Since I don't drive, I give other people the opportunity to do something.
And you don't drive, by the way. That was about a year ago that you stopped driving, which is amazing. And that was your own choice. You decided to stop.
It was my own choice.
Driving, which is also amazing.
I don't know if I told you I had an incident where I was waiting at 11 Mile in Newport. There were cars coming from my left, from my right. Nobody from my left. And I sat there and waited for those cars to come. And all of a sudden, I'm out there in front of that first car. No incident, no accident. But I don't remember going out there. And my son said to me one day, he was a manufacturer rep, so he was on the road a lot. He said, everybody has an incident where you wonder, how did I get here? Your mind was somewhere else, and you're fortunate you didn't have an accident, because I don't remember how I got here. So I decided that was on a Friday, and I went to church on Sunday morning and said to my pastor, I'm all done driving. And I donated my car.
Wow, that's amazing. You gave away your keys instead of having your keys taken from you.
Right.
Which is an age-old battle, age-old challenge.
I thought I was making it the easiest for my children by staying in my home. But now that I'm limited in my outdoor activities, I find that maybe I didn't make it the easiest. Maybe I should have moved out of my house so they don't have to be concerned about taking care of things. But my husband and I always worked together. He was a do-it-yourselfer, and I helped him lay the floor, and we did everything together, and we never had any real issues because we could always talk it out and work it out.
I gotta stop right there, because Betty, that is probably the one piece of advice or coaching that we provide to our clients. In fact, my business partner, Brad, and I joke that we're gonna write a book someday. And the title of the book is gonna say, just go talk to them. And then when you open the book, it's gonna say, just go talk to them. The end. That's the entire book. Because it's so common that we don't. We get stuck in our heads. We have these thoughts about, what's going on with somebody else, and they're bad, and they're not talking to me, they're doing this, or they're treating me disrespectfully, or, all sorts of things that we make up in our heads. But we don't take necessarily the initiative to just go talk to the person and say, hey, can we talk about something? So I love that you just put that on the table for us, that you and your husband were really, sounds like really good at that. You could just talk to each other and work things out.
My husband was an ombudsman for the city in 1986 when they had a sidewalk program. And he walked the streets and measured sidewalks. And he made the comment, they made the comment over the city hall that they never had any really issues with anybody. And he said, all they want is to be heard. As long as you could explain what you were doing, all they wanted to do was to be heard. And I think that's the one of those powerful leadership lessons in the world right there. Your people want to be heard.
I
think as a young person, I didn't have the self-confidence, but he helped build that in me. I give him all the credit for helping me do the things that I did. I taught Sunday school for 25 years, and I was a den mother, worked with the Girl Scouts, president of a women's group at church. So only from the encouragement that I got from him was I able to do some of the things that I did. So it's important to let somebody know that you feel they have the ability, only not the confidence to fulfill that ability.
Yeah, that you have someone who's encouraging you, who's literally putting courage into you.
Right.
And not a cheerleader, not someone who's just sort of falsely building you up, but a genuine sort of champion in your life that sees you've got more inside of you than you think you have inside yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was first dating him and he made the comment, he said, "Your opinion is just as good as the next person." You remember those, after all these years, remember some of the little things that were important.
Yeah. There's a great quote that says that people don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Right.
And I think that's such a valuable way of thinking, that we spend so much time in life and in a work context, getting stuff done and focused on the next task. And we forget about who we're being with people. We forget about how we show up with other people.
Right.
And really listening to them and being supportive, being encouraging. That's the stuff of life right there.
Yeah.
And I am not anywhere near as gifted as you are, Betty. But I'm learning every day, and it's such a blessing to have you as a neighbor and friend. We could go on for another few hours. I'd love to get your thoughts maybe as we wrap up here. Just what other advice do you have for people? You've already shared so many wonderful nuggets of living one day at a time, to having a positive attitude, to to people just want to be heard. What other bits of advice would you provide to the people listening?
Well, you've been wonderful neighbors for me. I've really enjoyed your children and just to see the family life that you have is great. And I think as the time goes by and the neighborhood changes, you just go along with it and respect people for their privacy, and you don't get quite as much acquainted as you used to when you had children and everybody else was raising their own children. You got to be more friendly in the neighborhood than it is today. You respect everybody else's privacy and are there for somebody if they need you, because they're always there for me.
There's a lot in that, Betty, that I could take away, which is part of what I heard, to applying it to today's society, is put those darn devices away and go talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
Go have a conversation. Be present in the moment.
Yeah. Well, I know I have an iPad and I do follow Facebook and email and my services online. And as much as there is wrong with all that media and so forth, there's a lot of good that's in there.
Yeah.
You have to make those choices also.
The time and the place. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just a matter of balancing. Too often, I think the pendulum has swung way too far.
Way too far.
Towards the reliance on technology. We've never been more connected and yet far apart in many ways.
And too instantaneous.
What do you mean by that?
Too many things are right now instead of thinking about it a little bit more before you speak or before you put it out there. That you aren't always speaking from your heart because you're too quick with the tongue.
Stop and think.
Stop and think.
Stop and think. Well, Betty, I always end these with a book recommendation. So I didn't warn you. I apologize. But what book might you recommend to folks out there? What's one of your favorite books?
Books that I would recommend?
Yeah, just could be anything. I know you're a voracious reader, so
Yeah.
for the audience out there, my wife will take books to Betty in a stack of 1,000-page type books, and it seems like within a few days she returns them, having all been read. So I know she's a voracious reader.
Well, I probably read more for an enjoyment than for, I kind of like history. I'm not one who remembers the names and the authors. I just read them for my own satisfaction. So I don't really have any recommendations. I love the things that Jessica sends me, because when I start a book, I finish it. I don't think there's ever been a book that I decided not to read unless it was something that was trashy paperback and I picked up. I might not finish that, but I'm almost through with this last one from Jessica, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great.
Another lesson in there. When you start something, finish it. It reminds me of my father.
Yeah.
If you're going to do something, Tom, do it right and do it well.
Do it right. If it's worth starting, it's worth finishing.
Yes. Well, Betty, thank you for coming on the podcast today, and thank you for just being a wonderful gift to the world. And I'm excited to see the future has in store for us, and seeing you much more over the coming months and weeks and months. So thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate your time, Tom. It's great.